accounts of park rangers, both local and state, from all around the United States, about strange happenings they've experienced while on the job. Some accounts are extremely graphic and grisly. Listener discretion is advised.
Case 1. Washington. I just wanted to say thank you for your time. Please state your full name, and then proceed to tell us your story from your view. Feel free to get as detailed as necessary.
Hello. My name is Jim D. Winters, and I work for the Park Rangers. On this particular date, 3rd of May, 2012,
It's okay, Jim. Take your time.
Well, John, I guess the best way to put it to you, and anyone who hears this, I'm quite sure I met someone who's dead. I was working my normal patrol, and was at the time assigned around Federation Forest State Park. We saw all manners of things. Naked homeless folk, occasional people going missing. Sometimes we'd find drug deals going on, but nothing was quite like this. It really began a couple days before, when some folks told us they had saw a woman wandering around the forest, catatonic. They would follow her, and eventually she'd disappear. The description was a red-haired woman, with pale skin, blue eyes, and a torn white dress. We put together a search team and went looking for ourselves. I was the lead on that team for the Rangers. We searched day and night and didn't seem to find or see anyone. Now, by the 3rd, we'd begun to believe this woman could very well be dead. Another part of the description given about her was that she seemed to be scarred and bleeding quite a bit. That's the part that was so strange, though. We went out to where she was supposedly seen and there was no blood to be found. The park closes at around dusk and normally we don't work nights. But I decided I'd stick around and do my own search that night. It is about 9 p.m. when I hear a voice while patrolling the forest. It was very distinct and sounded like a young woman. "Help me!" That's what I heard. Then, while I looked for the person behind the voice, I heard it again. There, standing upon a hill, was a woman, shaking, bleeding, and she fit the description given by the passerby the other day to a T. I naturally go up to this young woman, but as I do, she turns and begins walking away. I, of course, call out to her, telling her I want to help her and I'll lead her back to the station and we'll take things from there. I get to the top of the hill and she's gone. I'm talking vanished. I'm slowly moving my flashlight through the forest when I hear her voice again. "Help me," she says. I look further ahead and she's walking west from behind a tree. I rush on over and repeat to her who I am, who I work for, and that I'd like to help her. I get to the trees where she is, and just as I'm about to catch up to her, she goes around a tree. Next thing I know, I turn and she's gone. "Help me," the voice calls once again from further away now. Now, at this point, nothing is making sense to me. I'm starting to feel pretty uneasy myself, but this young woman clearly needs my help, and so I keep following her voice and continue my pursuit of her. "Help me!" Again, I hear her voice, and again, I continue deeper into the forest. I'm very well versed in the area, and I'm not worried about being lost, but this poor girl, I'm beginning to notice she seems to look more and more wounded every single time I see her. Finally, after she vanishes again, I hear her voice and continue out into a clearing. Upon arriving there, I see her crying. Now, you gotta understand, this woman went from partially bleeding to near ripped to shreds, bleeding heavily, and now her face is nearly unrecognizable. Crying uncontrollably, I see her lift a finger, which I can see the bone through some of the cuts on her hand now, and point down. "Help me!" She keeps crying, and as she does, she grows more desperate and afraid. She's shaking uncontrollably at this point. and as I get closer I can see the wound she has. She appears to be stabbed. I'm just about to reach the young lady when my foot hits something. There's a bit of a crunch as I look down towards my feet. You gotta understand where I am now. It isn't on any path or anywhere near where anybody would be visiting the park. Pulling some leaves and debris out of the way, I see something sticking out of the ground. And to my shock and horror, it appears to be a skeletal finger. I dig carefully but quickly. Now, and what do I find? A corpse in a tattered white dress, dried blood all over it. I call the local authorities and explain I found what I believe is the corpse of a woman we've been searching for. It isn't until later it really sets in. What I saw was the ghost of this poor young woman. She was trying to lead someone to her body. I was in shock and I've never experienced anything like it. I kept this pretty close to vest at first. Eventually, though, I did try to tell some close colleagues of mine how I actually found the body. You could imagine some of their reactions. Most of them I'd known for a while, so they wanted to believe me. But, you try to explain to anyone you found a murder victim because their ghost led you to them, and see how their reaction will be. At any rate, we did get enough forensics to find the killer eventually, and she is behind bars now, for life. It was the young woman's best friend. Could you imagine? Betrayed by someone you trusted the most. The murder was savage. It was personal. When you asked why she did it, she'd only say the bitch deserved it. Hearing that just really pissed me off. What could she have possibly done to deserve that? There were no hints or clues as to what went down between them. No guy, nothing to suggest that they were fighting. Personally, I believe the best friend was just evil. She probably never truly cared about her friend. But why wait 15 years before murdering someone? I suppose we'll never truly know.
Case 2, Texas. Thank you so much for your time. Please state your name and proceed to give us your story.
My name is Gavin R. West, and I work for the park rangers. It was 1990, and I was working at Lost Maple State Natural Area, and the area surrounding it. You're told some things when you first come on as a park ranger at any park. People have stories about ghosts, local legends, stuff like that. I didn't really believe any of that until July of 1990. I'd come on as a park ranger, replacing a man who I learned was missing. This was a topic of debate among many of the rangers, as many of them were considering the guy odd, but still a good friend. The man in question was named Jonathan Williams, and his disappearance is still unsolved to this day. It was probably my 3rd month on the job, and I'd gotten pretty used to it. I'd helped out people when they went missing, but I'd also patrol the parks, help preserve the natural wildlife and habitat. The area I worked in was more about preserving the park and its beauty and less about missing persons. On this particular morning, I remember going out to make some rounds. Make sure no one was doing anything they weren't supposed to be, and that anyone that shouldn't be there was removed from the park. That sort of thing was rare back then, but you'd occasionally get a homeless guy or gal that tried to make the park their home. It was while making the rounds that I saw something off. It appeared to be some sort of writing. I couldn't read it, and it almost looked like red paint was used to write it. Assuming someone was committing vandalism, I proceeded to take a few pictures and prep a report. As I continued taking pictures, I noticed more of these symbols and strange writings, as well as streaks of what I believed to be paint, leading deeper into the park. Eventually, I found myself near some cliffs, and this is where I found a body ripped to shreds. It was the most disgusting and disturbing thing I had ever seen in my life. Looking around, I saw a wolf in the distance. It simply stared my way, and didn't think much of it because nature and, I report the body, and we investigated the cause of death. It appeared to have been ripped to pieces by some sort of animal. Perhaps maybe the wolf I saw. There was a problem, however. You see, The heart was missing from the body. An animal could have taken it, of course, but the way the organs were displayed almost seemed to suggest that the murder was planned. The organs were splayed out in a manner to suggest a pentagram, and the way they were displayed didn't seem like something an animal would be capable of. We closed the park while we investigated further, and eventually we found a staging area. There were rocks and more strange symbols in the red paint, which turned out to be blood. In the center of a pentagram, made of sticks and circled in salt, there sat the victim's heart. Turning away from the scene, I looked into the distance and saw a wolf. I couldn't be certain, but it seemed like the same one. Turning towards the animal's direction, I began walking after it. As I did, it quickly turned and darted off into the woods. I thought it was strange, but continued walking in the direction. As I got deeper into the woods, I noticed the wolf's paw prints. They'd gone on for about another 100 feet when things suddenly took a strange turn. The wolf paw prints were suddenly human feet. I took photos and continued following the tracks until out of the blue, the tracks vanished altogether. I looked for any sign of anything and anyone and did not find it. I eventually headed back to the station and made my report on the matter. A few weeks went by and the park reopened at this point, and the mystery behind the dead body we found still laid without any answers. The media had jumped every conclusion imaginable, from a cult to some demon out of the forest. It only served to add to the popularity of the area, of course. One Friday morning I got up, headed to work, and saw some of my colleagues waiting for me. They looked to be in a state of shock, and when I asked them what had happened, they took a moment before telling me they'd seen someone swear that Jonathan Williams was there. I was going to dismiss it until they showed me a picture they'd taken of the man, and then showed me a comparison of the one of the old photographs of him. The resemblance was striking, and we were at a loss. The ranger said he tried to speak to his former colleague, but they only turned and bolted. Apparently, they moved fast because he said he'd barely blinked when the man was almost out of sight, whereas a few seconds before, he was a few feet in front of them when he took the photo. We reported our findings, and after our initial search, we found nothing that would help. The photograph is displayed to this day in the station. No other sighting of the man has been reported since, and we never solved the murder of the Jane Doe I'd found my round years ago either. I'm not sure if it's a cult or some kind of unknown species, but let me tell you this. Something strange is going on out there.
Case 3, New Jersey. Please state your full name and tell us your story. We'd like to thank you in advance for your time.
My name is Jack D. Clarkson, and I work for the State Park Rangers here in New Jersey. It's not a secret we have plenty of strange happenings and missing persons. That sort of thing around here happens a lot. We have local legends, and one of the most popular is, of course, the Jersey Devil. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not here to tell you about the Jersey Devil. No, I'm here to tell you about something completely unexplainable and stranger than that. I'm calling it the Echoes. You might be telling yourself, what's so strange about an echo? Allow me to further elaborate for y'all. It was August of 2014, and I was at the station near High Point State Park. It was late, and we were closed, but I decided to work on some things off the clock, late into the night. There I am, catching up on some writing reports about vandalism and repairs that needed to be made to park benches, etc., when my radio comes to life. There's a laughter coming from it. I picked up the radio and chuckled to myself, asking who's on the other end and trying to prank me. Again, only a low laughter in response. I couldn't quite make out if it was a male or a female, but there was definitely a laughter on the other end.
Come on, whoever's on the other end, you can quit joking around.
I wait. Then the response is more laughter, but this time it is less playful and sounds like it is multiple people.
Seriously, who is over there? Stop playing around. I'm all for joking, but y'all know this station isn't for playing around.
Silence. I go back to my paperwork when suddenly I am jolted by the sound of a loud bang on the front door of the station. Shit! I said out loud as I headed for the door. I'd spilled my coffee into my paperwork and would need to restart my latest report as a result. Pissed off, I rip open the door only to find nothing. There was no one there. No one near the door or anything. I did a quick search around the station and found nothing. As soon as I went back inside and locked the door and cleaned up the mess I had made, starting a new report, I wrote away when I heard the laughter coming from the radio again. The radio was more distorted and almost sounded half like laughing and half like crying after a few more minutes. The radio fell silent and 2 more large bangs came from the outside of the door. I jumped and, fed up, decided to grab a weapon, a flashlight, and headed out of the station. Opening the door was nothing. Locking the door behind me, I continued looking around until I heard a scream. I turned and rushed into the forest. As I can hear, more screaming. I couldn't quite tell where it was coming from until I heard the sound of voices crying from further inside the forest. Without hesitation, I followed the echoes until eventually I found a cave. Inside was a woman. She was bleeding next to a fire and I rushed to help her. She was crying, struggling to breathe, and I immediately called the authorities and waited with the woman. Eventually, the EMT and the cops showed up and brought the young lady to the hospital. It took a month or so, but outside of some scars, she made a full recovery. Upon giving her side of what happened, the woman spoke about a man who'd stalked her while she jogged. He'd eventually caught up with her and knocked her out. Shortly after she awoke, she said he cut on her and tortured her. She said she could still remember the whole thing, and she could remember his laughter. The woman was also shocked that she had been found. She said she screamed and cried, but the louder she cried, the louder the man laughed. I did eventually compare my story with hers, and she seemed at a loss, as was I. I only came because I heard laughter and crying all over my radio, which soon continued into the woods. The strangest part about all of this, she wasn't near a radio, and there was no way the voices I heard on the radio were hers or her killer's. A couple more months went by and I found a man, clawed open and dead in the park. He was identifiable, but his stomach had been ripped open and a huge claw mark was on his face. DNA and a personal identification by his would-be victim, the woman I'd saved, would reveal that he was the woman's attacker that night. I'm not sure what led me to the woman, but I'm grateful I found her, and I'm grateful to the things I call the echoes for leading me to this young lady before it was too late. I'll probably never have definitive answers about what was speaking through the radio or the forest to get my attention and lead me to the young woman I saved, but I'm grateful regardless.
Case 4, Montana. Begin whenever you feel ready.
My name is Darren J. Wendell, and I believe I am ready to speak about the things I experienced on the night of December 5th, 2002 in Ackley Lake State Park. I used to work for the park rangers, and to this day have never experienced what I witnessed that night. I wasn't on duty when it happened, but having been rather used to hanging around this park and sometimes camping, I took my family out for what was supposed to be a night of relaxation under the stars. Sadly, this isn't how this ends.
Are you sure you're okay with sharing your story? We don't have to do this if you don't wish to, or we can reschedule for another time if need be.
No, people need to know the truth. People need to know what the hell is going on out there. I'll admit, I wasn't exactly camping where people might normally. I, being a park ranger for 20 years at the time, knew the ins and outs of the state park, the lake, as well as any of the surrounding areas. So, my family and I camped away from the public in a little area I'd scouted out, and we'd camped in previously. It started out wonderfully. It was cold, but we were well prepared with a fire, some hot dogs, and marshmallows. and the casual camping stuff, like tents and creepy tales of things that supposedly happened around the park late at night. The tales we shared weren't real, of course. The one I'm sharing with you now, I wish wasn't either. I say it was about 10 or 11 p.m. by the time we decided to put out the fire and sleep for the night. At approximately 1 in the morning, I awoke to the sound of screaming. I shot up and immediately went outside to find my 8-year-old daughter and 7-year-old son staring at a deer hanging open and blood pouring out from the tree. The thing looked as though it had been turned inside out, and the sight was appalling. Scared for my children, we decided to pack up as quickly as possible and begin to trek back to the car to head home. As we arrived back on the proper trail, we froze in place at the sight of strange entities wearing deer skulls and black robes standing around us. Startled, I pulled out a gun and told them to move. I didn't know what sick shit these people or things were into, but I was going not to have any part of that shit. It was shortly after that I saw them beginning to vibrate, and things got really dizzy. I heard my wife and kids crying, and then I passed out. When I woke up, it was about 3 in the morning, and my family was nowhere in sight. I was left on the trail alone. Panicking, frantically calling out for my family, there was nothing. I ran everywhere, looking for any sign of them, scrambling to find any clues as to where they went. I found nothing still. I was scared, alone, and desperate as I continued my search. Eventually, I heard a dripping sound from the trees above me. Looking up, I saw my wife, or what was left of her. She'd been skinned alive, and I was only able to identify her by her wedding band. Continuing my search, I found a heavy blood trail leading further away, towards the lake itself. It was here I found my son's body. He was burned alive. I didn't have the heart or the will to press much further. I tried calling the police, but I couldn't get a signal. I remember feeling sick to my stomach, even throwing up a few times before I heard another scream. It was my daughter's voice. God, Mabel, I thought to myself, please be alive. You know how they say, be careful what you wish for, you might just get it. Well, she was alive, at least for a bit. She was standing near the lake when I noticed something around her waist. I ran towards her, and just as I reached her, it was then that I saw her eyes were missing. She said, Daddy, why can't I see? Daddy, help me, please. And then just like that, she was ripped into the lake. And I dove in immediately and swam, looking off and as soon as I could, but I found nothing. No one. It was too dark to see, and it was only after hours of searching it hit me that the lake wasn't frozen, which seemed odd. It was almost 6 when I realized the sky seemed dark. I couldn't see the moon or the stars. There was an eerie dread that hung in the air. As I was about to give up my search, coming up for air, I noticed these strange figures with skulls standing around the center of the lake. They looked towards the sky, and I felt the nauseating vibration occur again. Looking up towards the sky now, I saw something that made even less sense than everything that had happened to this point. To this day, I'm positive I saw it, but part of me still wants to believe I was seeing things. In the sky above, space opened, and I saw a giant eye stare down at the lake below. I remember the nauseating, fading, and distinct fear overtaking me. The next feeling I know, I was awoken by police on the edge of the lake. They said they got a call about a naked man laying on the side of the lake. They took me to a county for processing, then spoke with me about what happened. They didn't believe the things I told them. And I mean, could you blame them? They asked me about my family and what happened to them. I told them everything. It was pointless, but I tried anyways. After a while in lockup and a long investigation, they eventually found nothing linking me to the missing family or Anything that could stick, at least. I was let out, but forced to do community service for public indecency. I, of course, retired from the Rangers after that. A forced retirement. One I would have taken regardless. There's never been any further evidence of what might have happened to my family or any things that I told the police that I saw. I'm pretty much considered the local crazy now, and my life is ruined. But I know what I saw out there, and I know what happened. I have no clue why my family was murdered or why I was spared, but there are things out there that I can't explain or imagine. I'm sorry, I can't speak on this any further.
Additional notes on Case 4. After hearing Darren's claims, I have to admit, even I had a hard time believing them. So, I decided to dig a little deeper into his story and ask some of the locals and law enforcement what they thought. As should be no surprise, most people did think him crazy. That being said, the surprising majority of those I asked did not believe Darren had anything to do with his family's disappearance. They said, up until whatever happened to his family, he was a very loving, caring man, who the community respected, and overall he and his family were very well loved. I realize that Darren's case isn't about someone who saw something strange on the job as a park ranger, like the other stories to this point have been. But upon reading about his story online and realizing he was still a park ranger when everything happened, I thought it'd be important to include his story with the other cases presented. It is easily the strangest of the stories I've interviewed for this cast, but there's another, even stranger one that much of this world is familiar with, and I will investigate further in a future episode. That story is none other than the mystery surrounding a certain park ranger who burned down a forest in Bienville, as well as some new mysteries cropping up around the area. Why did Tim burn the forest down? What do the people of Bienville believe actually happened? Also, and possibly more importantly, why is it only a month or so after a fire that ravaged a town and burned its woods to the ground, have the same woods recovered 25%? These are questions I'll tackle along with several other mysteries in future episodes, but stay tuned as I give my final thoughts on the mysteries presented in this episode, and give you a preview of the next episode. My final thoughts on these cases. If there's one thing this episode shows, it is the strange things that are happening more and more in these parks and forests around the nation. Case 1 presented the ghost of a woman who simply wanted to be found, out in Washington. Is this proof of ghosts? If so, how does that change our understanding of what we believe we know about the world today? Case 2 brought us to Texas, where an unsolved murder and the seeming reappearance of a missing park ranger left more questions than answers. Was it really the park rangers? Is there a cult out there? Is this some kind of shapeshifter? Could it be something else altogether? Next was Case 3, up in New Jersey, where a park ranger has told us about what he dubs the Echoes, a series of mysterious audio mimickings that led to a life being saved out in the woods. What were these voices? Is there some sort of guardian spirit out there protecting certain souls wandering in the wilderness? What is it? And was it what killed the killer who stalked those woods? Could it be the past victims who died in the forest, or is it truly a single entity? Finally, we have Case 4, which I honestly am not sure what to make of. While interviewing Darren, I feel he was telling the truth, but is his truth really what he believes it to be? I can't think of many reasons he would dream up what he did, and it's very clear he believes his own story. We have wound up in parallel universes before, at least so we have read about, so maybe that could be it. The more I think about it, the less sense it makes. Perhaps some things will forever remain a mystery. I'd like to thank everyone who listened to this first episode of the Creep Factor podcast, Strange Things I Seen as a Park Ranger series. My name is John Billigan, and I hope you will stay with us as we delve deeper into these mysteries and more in future episodes. Next episode, we investigate possible demonic activity in Delaware, strange disappearances in Arizona, a possible close encounter with Bigfoot in Oregon, And finally, the strange case of a park in Alabama where people believe the weather is sentient. Have a safe night, everyone, and remember, you are never truly alone.